Your husband sucks. Go get your wife. I don't care about what he's doing right now. I don't care about what this now 23-year-old, 24-year-old woman is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you still here?
I keep holding on to something that probably isn't going to happen.
It's not going to. A hurricane blew your house down. You choosing to get mad about it is a choice to be miserable in the arrangement that you're choosing.
In this relationship with my wife, I did physically cheat with a coworker.
James, you've got some demons, brother, right? You've been treating people as though they are disposable. Sounds like your whole life, huh? You, Laura, you're going to hand him if you want to keep going, 7 days of here's what must be true this week to begin slowly rebuilding trust.
Should I stay with my wife after she had a one-night stand and got pregnant? My first thought was, where are we going to put another child? We only have a 3-bedroom house. And then I sat there staring at the clock for a couple minutes, and then I went, wait, I had a vasectomy.
If somebody comes and says, hey, can me and my husband rebuild our marriage after an affair? My answer is 100% of the time, yes, you can.
Why are you still here? You choosing to get mad about it is a choice to be miserable in the arrangement that you're choosing.
Welcome to round 1 of Bottom versus Delony. In my previous 2 Delony videos, there were hundreds of comments from men that Delony's relationship advice favors women and wives and that he ruins marriages. Comments included that his YouTube show is nothing more than entertainment and that he's a grifter and a fraud. As promised, I heard those claims, and I've read those hundreds of comments. And here's my response and some questions that will get answered along the way. Is Delony an anti-male grifter? Is his advice backed by real credentials? Is Delony a Christian at all? Am I using Delony's content and men's despise of him to grift for clicks? If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, I hope you do. I put a lot of time into this video series and others before it, and your support really does give me a lot of motivation to keep it up. So thanks for being here. Today we're going to get dissertations, credentials, public records, and a research scoring index built around one question. Is Delony a fraud? I'll definitely be taking some punches and I'll get some bruises along the way, but hopefully give some back. Delony is in the 0.01% of Americans to earn 2 doctoral degrees. I have 1 PhD. Delony has 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. I have less than 7,000. This could be a bloodbath. It's going to be a lot of punches taken and thrown. But here's what I've set myself up for. Determining objectively which of us has the better academic record, produced higher quality research, and is more equipped to help men. And when I say objectively, that will be confirmed and made clear as we go. Make no mistake, this is not an opinion piece about whether I think Delony is full of shit. This will be an evidence-based discussion. All right, so this, again, is part 1 of a 2-part Delony series. This one focuses on credentials, platforms and public authority, and dissertation scoring. Part 2, that'll be coming out soon, focuses on Delony's cheating video advice patterns. So we're going to analyze and assess transcripts from his videos to answer some of those questions. The larger question is whether Delony's public authority is supported with evidence and if he shows any biases. So let's set this up to get the full picture. As I said, men's comments in my prior Delony videos repeatedly questioned his relationship advice. Some said Delony is harder on men than he is on women. They say his advice hurts men and marriages. His show is entertainment. It's not real mental health help. And calls are one-sided and lack full context. This video responds with credentials, public records, dissertation qualities, and evidence of overperceptions. Let's talk a little bit about Delony and his background, and then we'll get into mine. It's only fair if I put my information out there as well. Before Dave Ramsey, Delony was a higher education administrator and a speaker. The way I understand it, what I could find out online, is that he was at one time speaking at a college orientation event, and one of Ramsey's executive vice presidents, or maybe there was only one, I'm not sure, was at that speaking engagement. Delony says that the executive saw him speaking and said, "I'm hiring that guy." Delony says that he did not know anything about money, which is Dave Ramsey's platform, and that he was just a mental health guy. And as we all know, that Ramsey connection ultimately created his national media platform. So Delony is obviously a Ramsey Solutions personality. He's host of the Dr. John Delony Show, and you can find him as a co-host or a contributor on the Dave Ramsey Show from time to time. He's publicly presented as a mental health expert on their own materials. In popular press, he's a popular press author of 3 books through the Ramsey Press and Ramsey Solutions publishing system. Those books include Redefining Anxiety, What It Is, What It Isn't, and How to Get Your Life Back. Another is Own Your Past, Change Your Future, a not-so-complicated approach to relationships, mental health, and wellness. Another is Building a Non-Anxious Life. He's also currently, I believe, still a public speaker on anxiety, relationships, wellness, and things like personal change. And I do want to mention this as part of my investigation led me to Reddit, in which I found one commenter claiming that a producer contacted, I believe it was his wife, for a half-hour dry run of a video call. Another claimed that the calls are scheduled. And one person claimed that Delony receives short summaries of what the call is going to be about, so that he has a little bit of time to prepare. And another claimed that surprises still do happen during the calls when he's not anticipating topics or callers' responses. These claims support screening and production, but I do want to make it clear they don't prove that any of his calls are fake. But if they are true, those comments, then it certainly would reduce any credibility that John has in my mind at this point. John's degrees and training, let's talk about that. He's got a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities and Psychology from Lubbock Christian University, a Master's in Education, in Higher Education Administration from Texas Tech, a PhD in Higher Education Administration from Texas Tech, that was 2010, and his second PhD is Counselor Education and Supervision, again from Texas Tech, that one in 2019. His 2010 dissertation was on small college campus discipline. His 2019 dissertation was on counselors who counsel attorneys. He's got at least one publicly identifiable article or manuscript, but I couldn't confirm a substantial peer-reviewed publication record. And now let's get into my information. Before starting this YouTube channel a year ago, almost to the day, I had a lot of experience in things like call center supervision. Worked for a while in factory assembly lines, worked in hospitality as a server. I worked in pharma studies, doing interviews across the Midwest and the East Coast on pharma studies. Taught undergraduate courses at DePaul University, master's level psychology courses at Nova Southeastern University. I've worked in institutional research at 3 colleges or universities in Louisiana, Illinois, and Florida. For a while, I also did dissertation consulting with students who were working on their dissertations. And I almost forgot about this. I did at one time do YouTube, in which I made videos and helped students to develop their research and understand stats that they were doing in their research. Now I am an independent content creator, as you know. I'm self-published as an author of Confessions, a raw chronicle of fatherhood in the age of absence, and the author and developer of Rules of Engagement with its accompanying field guide. More information about that is forthcoming. My degrees include an associate's in applied science in marketing from Illinois Valley Community College. That was 1997. A bachelor's in psychology from Lewis University in 2007. A master's degree in psychology from DePaul University, 2011. And my only PhD in community psychology from DePaul University in 2014. I've got 8 scholarly or academic journal publications, those 2 self-published books, more than 40 academic presentations, panels, posters, and roundtables on my CV. My research topics include divorce, fathers, fatherhood, men's issues, community psychology. Some of my earlier master's work was around religious pluralism and school sense of community, along with institutional missions and higher education assessments. So here's a real quick initial comparison. Again, just to kind of summarize some of that, John Delony has 2 PhDs and a much larger media platform. I've got 1 PhD, but more measurable research publication records, as far as I could find. Delony's profile is centered around higher education administration, talking about his background here, along with student affairs, counselor education, crisis response, public communication, and media. My profile is centered around, again, community psychology, institutional research in colleges and universities, quantitative and applied scholarship, publications, publishing research, and presenting it, and a little bit of teaching. Now, this next section where I want to go now turns from general credentials to the quality of our dissertations themselves. And just a quick note before we keep going, this is the kind of work that I'm building through rules of engagement. It's not therapy and it's not motivational hype. It's a self-paced book chapter plus written exercises designed to help men move from frustration to action. Chapter 4 is available now, with the other 13 chapters to follow in the upcoming weeks. Chapter 4 is on Stop Apologizing, and the next releases will be Speak Boundaries Early and Psychology Isn't Foreplay. That's available on realpress.com right now, so go check it out. The chapter gives you the information and the mindset. The field guide gives you the action steps. All right, now back to Delony. Let's transition to describe our 3 dissertations and then have a very detailed look at their quality ratings. Delony's 2010 dissertation was an interview study of how 4 small private colleges handled student discipline. He interviewed campus discipline administrators and reviewed institutional documents to understand how those schools viewed discipline, student learning, and student information. In plain terms, it was a higher education administration qualitative study about campus conduct systems and not a study about marriage, counseling, outcomes, or relationship advice. His 2019 dissertation was another interview study of counselors who worked with attorneys as clients. He interviewed 4 licensed professional counselors about their experiences in counseling lawyers, and then organized the findings around themes like attorney resistance, power, stress, and the counseling relationship. In plain terms, it was an exploratory counselor education study about counselors' perceptions of attorneys that they have as clients, not a direct study of marriage, divorce, infidelity, or family counseling outcomes. My 2014 dissertation was a quantitative study of divorced fathers' psychological well-being. I built and tested a theoretical model using statistical methods, including path analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, and the development of a new parenting locus of control scale. In plain terms, it was an empirical study focused on divorced fathers, measurement, model testing, and divorced fathers' psychological well-being. All right, now that we've got that set up, let's take a look at the good stuff, the quality of those 3 dissertations. What I did was create a dissertation scoring index, and for a little bit of context, I actually wanted to do this several years ago. I just didn't have the time, the support, and connections to help it, but now with modern technology, it's much easier to do and to do objectively. So this dissertation scoring index was developed through an iterative, question-driven process that's designed to evaluate doctoral dissertations as works of scholarship rather than merely as completed institutional requirements to earn the degree. So here's what I did. I let ChatGPT lead this process without making any leading questions or giving any information in advance. I did not tell ChatGPT what I was going to do or what I wanted to look at. My initial prompt was to ask what should be taken into account or consideration when creating a scoring system for doctoral dissertations. Again, this prompt did not identify any of my preferred categories, weightings, expected outcomes, or desired scoring results. In response, ChatGPT proposed a 9-part multidimensional evaluation framework that's organized around the major components of scholarly dissertation quality. These include research design and methodology, research review and theoretical approach, data analysis, evidence, and interpretation, research questions and study purpose, originality and contribution to the field in research, argument quality and coherence. Also, we have writing quality and coherence, and ethical professional standards. Then we have limitations, implications, and future research. You scholars will understand how this progresses and how those are all part of the process. Now, the central principle that emerged from this initial exchange was that a dissertation should not be evaluated solely by whether it satisfied formal requirements of a doctoral program, right? So we're not looking at whether it actually was enough to complete the program to be awarded the degree by the dissertation committee. It's objective outside of that, to get to the harder questions and expectations of how well the research reflects quality scholarship. Now, each of these categories would be then scored with a total possible score of 0 to 100, which I'll break down in just a moment. After I affirmed this approach for the full quality scoring system, I then asked ChatGPT for supplemental questions that could each be scored independently on a score of 1 to 10 on that scale. ChatGPT then proposed 5 additional evaluative questions that focused on independent scholarly thinking, the distinction between evidence and speculation, and similar topics. I'll get into that in a moment as well. Now, these supplemental questions were designed to capture a broader scholarly judgment or assessment that might not be fully reflected in a categorical points total system. So, the weighting of the 100-point dissertation index reflects the relative importance of each component, as well as the quality expected of a doctoral research project. And here's how the scoring categories of the resulting dissertation scoring index played out. Research design and methodology were given the largest weight at 20 possible points because the methodological structure determines whether the dissertation can answer the research questions. Literature review and theoretical grounding could receive a total of 15 points because the doctoral scholarship depends on a meaningful command understanding of the field, along with relevant theory and prior research. Data analysis, evidence, and interpretation also could get 15 points because a dissertation must handle evidence responsibly and connect findings to conclusions without making oversteps or overreaches. Research question and purpose, originality and contribution, argument quality and coherence, quality of writing and organization were each weighted at 10 points. Now, these are essential features of strong doctoral work, but they're not independently sufficient without sound methodology and responsible use of evidence. Ethical and professional standards, along with limitations, implications, and future research, were all scored or weighted at 5 points because they're essential in scholarly integrity and interpretive maturity, while typically functioning as more supporting than being central or dominant features of a dissertation and its quality, unless serious problems are present or arise. And I want to give the clear reminder that I did not develop these categories or these questions. They all came from ChatGPT. I just asked it what would be the best approach, did not know what I was up to. And that was intentional, as I mentioned, because I wanted to avoid any accusations about the biases or cherry pickings of topics and scores. So the index was not developed through leading questions that were intended to produce a predetermined outcome. I did not ask ChatGPT to give more credit or more weighting to one type of dissertation, one methodological approach, or one scoring category over another. After the index was created, I tested it by applying it to a couple of random dissertations that I got online as preliminary scoring tests. Now, this part of the process served as an informational calibration of sorts. It allowed the scoring categories and supplemental questions to be used in practice. Those initial scoring tests demonstrated that the index could be applied to both quantitative, like mine, and qualitative, like John's, dissertations, while still preserving methodological flexibility. The process also led to one important procedural refinement, and that was that each dissertation should be evaluated as a standalone scholarly work without comparing it to previously scored dissertations. So we're not doing any comparison here, we're scoring them independent of each other. So this avoids score anchoring from comparing one work to another, and it keeps the evaluation focused on the specific work that's being reviewed. The final index, therefore, consists of a 100-point scoring framework and 5 supplemental questions for further investigation that could be rated from 1 to 10. And together, this 2-part system is intended to evaluate not just whether a dissertation is completed or was accepted, but whether it demonstrates meaningful doctoral level scholarship. All right, with all of that context behind us, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the scoring. We're going to start with John Delony's 2010 dissertation, then we'll do his second, and then mine third. I'm going to look up here on my notes over here. So John Delony's dissertation from 2010 in higher education administration, the small college, and the campus discipline process. ChatGPT, in the category of research design and methodology, gave him a score of 16 out of 20, noting appropriate qualitative design for using 4 institutional cases, administrative interviews, and a couple of other things that mentioned in there. His literature review for that dissertation in 2010 scored a 12 out of 15, with notes that include solid coverage of student discipline, students' learning, the use of small colleges, and faith-based context. For data analysis and evidence and its interpretation, that received a score of 12 out of 15. For his coding system, his development of his themes, and his coding transparency could be a little bit stronger. We then have research questions and purpose. That was scored a 9 out of 10 for clear, focused purpose and clear examination and processes with perceived student learning outcomes. Quality and contribution was scored an 8 out of 10. This addresses apparently a real gap by focusing on discipline processes at small private colleges. The argument and quality coherence scored an 8 out of 10, moving from literature to the gap to the method, themes, and implications. That's actually pretty tricky to do, to make everything, the argument, flow very well. It's actually the sign of a good writing. For writing and organization, it was scored an 8 out of 10. It was apparently clearly organized. It was readable, though somewhat wordy. I noticed that a little bit when I read them myself. Sometimes wordy and practitioner-oriented, which is fine. Ethical and professional standards, that was scored a 5 out of 5 for attention to confidentiality, handling of documents, and the like. And finally, number 9, limitations, implications for future research, was scored a 4 out of 5. Apparently, Delony had acknowledged limits of his scope, but lacked student voices that could be addressed more sharply. So, giving him a final score of 82 out of 100. ChatGPT says that overall it has a strong applied qualitative framework for doctoral work, and again, the final score, 82 out of 100 for John Delony's 2010 dissertation. Let's go ahead now and take a look at his second. So this is Delony's second dissertation from 2019 in Counselor Education and Supervision, Counseling Resistance Influentials, the experiences of counselors who counsel attorneys. For this one, research design and methodology was scored a 14 out of 20. Apparently had appropriate qualitative study, but limited to only 4 counselors and no attorney side data. I didn't I didn't read this one in full, but I think what it's saying is that this interview study included interviews with 4 people. The literature review and theoretical grounding was scored 12 out of 15 for relevant and broad, although it was sometimes more advocacy-driven than analytically structured. That's a big no-no when you're doing a dissertation. No advocacy. It's all got to be facts and figures and objective. For the third one, data analysis, evidence, and interpretation was scored 11 out of 15. Notes here include clear themes, but the coding process appears somewhat misimpressionistic and lightly documented. All right, so I don't know if maybe cutting a couple of corners there or something. Category number 4, research question and scope was scored 8 out of 10. This had a clear focus on counselors who counsel attorneys. Number 5, originality and contribution. This one apparently addresses a real gap in the literature and offers an original resistant influentials angle. For argument quality and coherence was scored 8 out of 10. Some claims extended beyond what the 4 interviews could firmly support. Writing and organizing scored 8 out of 10. Engaging and organizing, sometimes a little more restrained empirical prose. Number 8, ethical and professional standards scored 5 out of 5. Handles confidentiality and trustworthiness. And number 9, limitations, implications, future research scored 5 out of 5 for acknowledging the scope limits, the data, and lack of corroborating records. So that's Delony dissertation number 2. We can see a total final score here of 79 out of 100. So he's gone backwards a little bit. His first one, 9 years prior, was scored higher than this one. Or the overall comment that ChatGPT gave here is credible, exploratory doctoral work with a meaningful applied contribution, but score capped a bit by small sample and limited data breadth. So we've got his scores in. Let's move into mine. Okay, this is my 2014 PhD dissertation scoring in community psychology from DePaul University. Title was The Psychological Well-Being of Divorced Fathers, a Theoretical Model and Projection. So research design and methodology scored a 16 out of 20, adequate sample size, and sophisticated modeling. By the way, I'll leave links for mine and I think Delony's as well if you want to get these. I'm not going to give you Delony's document myself, but I will show you where you can download it yourself if you want to. I think I have mine on my Google Drive. I'll just give you a link to that if you want to read these yourselves, and hell, have fun with that, knock yourself out, come back and give some comments. Okay, so back to this. So research design and methodology scored 16 out of 20 for adequate sample size and sophisticated modeling, limited by cross-sectional self-reports. Yep, I get that. Literature review and theoretical grounding scored 13 out of 15. Strong theory base and a clear gap around divorced fathers' psychological well-being. Data analysis, evidence, and interpretation scored 13 out of 15 for using correlations, ANOVA, path analysis, factor analysis, all through casual language. Although casual language is somewhat too strong. Research questions and its purpose scored 9 out of 10. They were apparently clear, testable. The model of divorced fathers' well-being and its proposed predictors were adequate and proper. For quality and contribution, scored 9 out of 10 for addressing an under-examined population and adds a useful parenting locus of control framework. That was a measure that I had developed. Number 6, argument quality and coherence, scored 8 out of 10. Coherent from theory to findings, though some interpretations extend beyond the design. I think that's what interpretations are for, but yeah, fair enough. Writing and organization scored 8 out of 10. Well organized and readable, only minor copy editing and phrasing issues. Ethical and professional standards scored 4 out of 5. No major problems are evident, although available materials provide limited detail. I think what that's referring to is the appendix. My appendix, I believe, was not extensive. And finally, the last one, category number 9, limitations, implications for and future research, scored 4 out of 5 for acknowledging key limits and constraints caused by subgroup analyses. So we can see a final score here of 84 out of 100. ChatGPT says that overall this is strong doctoral work with a meaningful empirical contribution, and capped, the score is mainly by cross-sectional self-reported data and some causal overreach. So there we've got it, the 3 scores. Let's put them side by side.
I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. Oh, yeah. I think that we've all had enough.
Okay, and now on to the supplemental information, those questions that I mentioned just a little bit ago. I'm going to go over these a little more quickly, but we can see for Delony's first dissertation in higher ed and administration, the 5 questions were around independent and scholarly thinking, evidence versus interpretation, contribution beyond completion, right? So how much usefulness does it have after the dissertation itself is done? How well it withstands outside scrutiny, and questions, method, findings, coherence. Have a look, take a pause here real quick. Those could all range from scores from 1 to 10, with all of them averaging an overall 7.8 out of 10. This ChatGPT says overall strong coherence and useful contribution. Main limitations coming from administrator-only perspectives and limited direct evidence of student learning. So go ahead, have a pause at this for more details, and let's go ahead and take a look at his second one. So for the supplemental questions in Delony's 2019 PhD in counselor education supervision, for those same items, he came out with an average item score of 7 out of 10. Notes include useful exploratory work with a coherent structure, limited by small sample and perspective, single perspective evidence base. Again, another interview study there. And let's take a look at my supplemental questions. Let me put them up here real quick. Again, same items, same questions here. Mine came out to a total of 7.8 on an average of 10. Overall notes include strong doctoral work with meaningful theoretical and applied contributions, limited by design constraints and causal claims. So again, go ahead, pause, have a look at them in more detail.
I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah.
All right, so let's back up just a little bit for a little more context after having gone through all of that. And we'll have a look at content approaches for both Delony and myself. Delony's show is not branded as Christian counseling, pastoral counseling, or Bible advice-based advice. In fact, it's one of the things I did want to make sure that I mention. It's very rare, at least from what I found, that Delony actually mentions biblical principles, faith-based relationships, anything like that in his video. So I do want to set that clear. That was actually one misconception that I had. I was much more critical of him maybe than I should have been for not practicing or preaching or following biblical principles when giving advice about marriages, relationships, infidelity, and the like. When in fact, he's not preaching those things in his videos. So I'm not going to comment necessarily on that, other than really just to say, maybe I just should not be so hard on him. That's not his platform. Within the larger Ramsey organization, yes, maybe it is. Maybe more in his less public life, in his personal life, or other things that he does, maybe speaking engagements, he does speak on those more directly. But for the purposes here, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that. Nothing in his content that I've gone through so far or upcoming in part 2 will assess whether or not he follows biblical principles in Christianity in any of his content or his videos in responses to people. Let's make that clear. But as we know, the show is branded around relationships and mental health. Faith does appear in some of his calls, with scripture, church, and religion appearing when some callers invite or add that topic into the conversations. His default device is therapeutic, relational, practical, and, of course, as we know, compatible with the larger Ramsey network. My content approach, on the other hand, is independent commentary and research review channel. I focus a lot on men's issues, relationships, fatherhood, divorce, sometimes laws and policies, along with applied psychology. And I do that by investigating academic articles, public records, and transcripts, like we'll do with Delony here in part 2. So it's not presented as therapy or counseling. My content is often scripted or semi-scripted analyses, commentary, and critiques. My default style is research-informed, evidence-based, male-centered, and willing to challenge public figures, institutions, and larger public narratives. So all of that brings us to round 2 coming soon. Round 2 is where we move from credentials to the claims that men have been making all along. That Delony is anti-male, that he gives men bad advice, and that his advice regarding husbands and wives are not handled in the same way when they are involved in infidelity. So the next question is, what happens when his own video transcripts involving men's and women's infidelity are analyzed systematically? Is he really more biased toward women? Does his advice change depending on if the cheater is a man or a woman? In part 2, I'll take the 4 most recent qualifying Delony videos that involve male cheaters and the 4 most recent qualifying videos that involve female cheaters, and test those videos in their transcripts against men's accusations and what they say about Delony being biased and a fraud. Does Delony hold male and female cheaters accountable in the same way? Does he assign some burden of, or more burden of repair to husbands than wives? Does the one-sided call format of his videos lead to strong conclusions from partial information? We're going to get those answers, so come back soon. I think you're going to like the results.